This is Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA. Here is John Budden.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm John Budden, and welcome to Money Talk. Here's the lineup for today's show. We start with Dave Sally at the Ottawa Business Journal. Then we go to Keith Bliss, who is Senior Vice President, Catone & Company in New York City. And he looks at market reaction to Donald Trump's address to the U.S. Congress. After the first break, we go to Richard Fadden, former CSIS director, and he comments on why Canada must deal with Russia carefully. After the news, Catherine Murray of our affiliate BNN in conversation with Ariana Huffington, who suggests that Donald Trump's team in place now might not be there for the long haul. And then, after the final break, John York, president of Rain 43, and he comments on what Snap's IPO and the Oscars mean for marketers. But first, let's go to Dave Sally at the Ottawa Business Journal. Well, folks, it's great to welcome Dave Sally from the Ottawa Business Journal to Money Talk. How are you, Dave?
I'm pretty good, John. How are you?
Oh, keeping warm and waiting for spring skiing. You've been curling, so that's getting you through winter.
Absolutely.
Dave, tech companies have been dominating the headlines a lot lately. So this week, we figured we'd start with something completely different and a topic everyone can relate to, pizza.
That's right, John. That sounds like a pretty good way to kick things off to me. 2017 is a big year for one of Ottawa's most recognizable restaurant chains, which is celebrating a milestone anniversary with ambitious expansion plans. Gabriel Pizza opened its first restaurant on St. Joseph Boulevard in Orleans 40 years ago, on February 28, 1977. Now, in a nice bit of symmetry, the company plans to kick off a year of celebrations and store openings that will bring the total number of Gabriel locations to, you guessed it, 40. Founder Michael Hanna is still involved in the business, as are his 5 brothers, although Michael's son George now oversees the company's day-to-day operations. The younger Mr. Hanna also grew up in the business, spending weekends in the store while his parents worked. He says he still loves the pizza game. He says that although new locations, including a full-service restaurant, have been added over the years, the chain's growth was slow until it began to franchise just over a dozen years ago. Many initial franchisees were current or former employees who knew the product and believed in it, Mr. Hanna says. Over the years, customer tastes have changed. There's been increased demand for things such as whole wheat crusts and, more recently, gluten-free crusts. But Mr. Hanna says Gabriel will never stray from the original recipe that has made it such a local success story. He's now applying a similar principle to a new sister brand to Gabriel, the Crust and Crate Public House. The sit-down restaurants focus on gourmet-style pizza and feature local craft beers, along with some other fun food, Mr. Hanna says. Crust and Crate's first location at Lansdowne Park opened in 2015. A second location is scheduled to open in May or June, and Mr. Hanna says his long-term vision is to have at least 1 or 2 in every major city across the country. Gabriel also announced recently it will be the official pizza supplier for the Ottawa 2017 celebrations, marking Canada's 150th anniversary. Gabriel Pizza will feed thousands of volunteers at events throughout the year and provide both financial and marketing support to Ottawa 2017 by placing the official logo of the celebrations atop its pizza boxes. Mr. Hanna says the company's secret to success is pretty straightforward. It strives to make the best quality product possible and believes in what it's selling.
Back on the tech scene, Ottawa-based software firm Kinaxis continues to gain momentum after a strong 2016.
That's right, John. Kinaxis announced this past week it increased both quarterly revenues and profits to close out 2016 and is projecting more growth in 2017. The supply chain management software provider reported total revenues of $30.3 million U.S. for the fourth quarter ending December 31st. That's an increase of 25% from the same period in 2015. Subscription-based revenue represented most of that total, coming in at $22.7 million in the quarter. That marked a 34% increase year over year. And that breakdown is significant for many observers, since subscriptions provide a greater opportunity for recurring revenue than one-time sales. On the year, total revenue rose 27% to $116 million. and subscription revenue rose 26% to $81.8 million. These results are in line with Kinaxis' 2016 guidance of more than $100 million in total revenues. The company said the positive results were driven by new customer acquisitions and expansions to existing customer subscriptions. Gross profit was also up on the year, coming in at $80.2 million in fiscal 2016, an increase of 22%. Total profits increased slightly in Q4 to $1.7 million, compared with $1.3 million a year earlier, but annual profits decreased to $10.7 million from $12.7 million in fiscal 2015. Kinaxis chalked that up to reductions to investments in sales and marketing and in research and development, as well as increases in share-based payments. The firm set financial targets for the coming year as high as $144 million in total revenue, including an increase in subscription revenue of 25 to 27%. Kinaxis also signed a deal with electronics manufacturer Samsung to manage its supply chain process.
And Dave, what's coming up on OBJ's radar?
Well, John, as you may remember, OBJ and the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce named Ross Video's David Ross the CEO of the Year at the Best Ottawa Business Awards last November. Well, this Wednesday morning, Mr. Ross will be the featured speaker at the Telfer School of Management's Alumni Breakfast. The event will include breakfast and networking opportunities, as well as a discussion on thought leadership with Mr. Ross. For more information and to register, go to www.telfer.uottawa.ca.
Great Ottawa stories, Dave. We'll talk again next Sunday at 2 p.m. and have a great week.
You too, John. Thanks.
Now to Keith Bliss, Senior Vice President, Catone & Company in New York City.
U.S. stock futures are trading up following last night's address to Congress by U.S. President Donald Trump and comments by a couple of U.S. Fed governors as well. For reaction and insight, we head to the New York Stock Exchange, and we're joined by Keith Bliss, Senior Vice President at Catone & Company. Keith, great to see you again. Why don't we start with what the Fed governors had to say yesterday? Has it reshaped your view on the likelihood of a March rate hike?
No, I was in the minority camp for a long time, Paul, that I thought a March rate hike was in the cards. I was a little amazed over the last 2 weeks how the market really wasn't listening to what the Fed governors were saying with regard to where they saw the economy, with regard to where they saw employment, as well as the inflation data. And some of the inflation data that we got today is tracking right to their 2.5% range that they're looking at, and there's been more than one Fed governor that says we're at full employment right now, maximum employment, in fact, and given the strong earnings that we've had and some of the other macro data that's coming in on the PMI numbers around manufacturing, we're going to get some more of that later this morning and tomorrow. I thought a March rate increase was always in the cards. They've said that they want to be on a pace, an even-keeled pace, but they also don't want to fall too far behind. And if they fell too far behind, that was going to force them to do a couple more increases probably in the fall, or maybe 3 increases in the fall. And I know they don't want to do that. So, yeah, the market, the Fed funds futures turned right around, and now they're banking on an increase in March, I believe July, at the July meeting, and then in the December meeting. And I think that's an accurate call on the market.
Keith, it's John here. In terms of the number of Fed rate hikes for the year, are you in the camp that they'll do 3 consistent with the dot plot, or do you think there's a risk that they might do a bit more?
Well, if you look at what the market is telling us, it's now tilting towards the side of doing 4. I think they'll stick with 3. You got to take them for their word. They've been excellent at telegraphing their policy the last 5 years. And if you just followed what they said and what they were doing, not only at the FOMC meetings, but then once they get out and they start talking to the rest of the world and jawboning the market, if they say they're going to do 3, they're going to do 3. So I think we'll be sitting right about the targeted Fed funds target right between 100 and 125 basis points by the end of the year. And of course, as you know, John, it's all data dependent. We'll have to see how well the economy tracks. They're doing this without total knowledge of what the policies will be coming on the administrative side, both fiscal as well as tax reform and the like. So, again, all things being equal right now, I think we have to take them at their word, and I do, that there will be 3 this year.
What are your takeaways from the speech last night? Was there anything there that would reshape the views of the market on different sectors or different companies that might be affected by things like infrastructure spending, trade policies?
Well, I think he reinforced that he still wants to do those things. I think President, for as good of a speech as it probably was in his entire lifetime, I think the market is steadying itself a little bit because he actually sounded a little bit normal, not such a bloviator and not so bombastic. And I think that calmed the markets. It's certainly what the American people wanted to see, and probably most people around the world is people were getting a little nervous and tense about the tone and the tenor coming out of Washington. Particularly from the Oval Office. I think he missed an opportunity, though, to be much more definitive in these pro-growth initiatives that they talked about. If I was standing up there in the bully pulpit, as it were, I would have said, Congress, we need to pass tax reform in 2017. Congress, we need to get an infrastructure spending bill done soon. Congress, you need to continue and be more aggressive with regulatory rollback smartly, which is hampering our business and our growth. I think he missed that opportunity. But by and large, the market obviously liked the speech. I think the American people, by and large, like the speech. There's always going to be the haters on the other side who will not, play with anything that President Trump is going to say for good reason and not good reason. But yeah, I think the main takeaways to the speech for me and for the market is that perhaps this is a change in tone. We can get down to doing business, striking deals as opposed to casting and throwing arrows and swords at one another. And that's really what we need in the economy and globally as well.
Keith, what are your thoughts on the broad market in the aftermath of the shift in Fed expectations and Mr. Trump's comments?
Well, if I take a look at the broader market, John, both fundamental, technical, and quantitative data, which we look at quite a lot, picking up bits and pieces of information from the ether, as it were, I think the market is still poised to move higher, not just because futures are trading nicely higher this morning. If you look at the technical aspects of the four major indexes, the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, and the Russell 2000, they're all still sitting well above long-term trend lines dating back to 2011, 2009. There's no overhead resistance that we can see. Sure, there's a little backing and filling going on, but on a short-term basis, where we see it right now is I actually don't see the markets overbought, despite what a lot of people are saying, and they can trade higher. And the one index that I really have been focusing on because of all is the Russell 2000, because of all the constituent groups. They're the ones that will really benefit from the policies that President Trump is talking about. The Russell 2000, in my mind, is totally neutral and would not get overbought until it trades above 1,500 on a broad index level. So that gives us a lot of room to run here. Sure, there'll be times that we move sideways. Sure, there'll be times that we may trade off a little bit. But I think if you've noticed in the market, the true trend is upward. Even those days that we've been negative, they've only pulled back just a few points, less than a percentage. And that tells me that people are willing to take a chance when the market comes to them a little bit. They go ahead and put a bid in, and that has a nice base level of support in the market across all the major indexes. So, again, I think we're poised to move higher.
Keith, it's been good to speak to you again. Thank you very much.
Been my pleasure. Thank you.
Keith Bliss, Senior Vice President at Catone & Company from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Stay with us, folks. We'll go to a break, and when we come back, former CSIS Director Richard Fadden. You are listening to 580 CFRA.
You're listening to Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA.
The former head of Canada's intelligence service says we need to start sharing more classified information with the corner office. Richard Fadden, the past director of CSIS and National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, made the comments to Paige Ellis at a conference today on cyber security. He says it's important to broaden the number of people being given security clearance for exchanging top secret information.
One of the main difficulties we have is that if information is going to be useful, it has to be classified information, secret information. And Canada does not, as a matter of routine, clear people in the private sector. We do clear some, and we're clearing more than we used to. But other countries like the United Kingdom or the United States clear far more. So you can't really have a serious conversation, say, with the banking industry about cyber threats if you're not willing to share a few of the secret level information, data that you have as a government. So I just think we need to broaden a little bit the number of people who are given security clearances.
You mentioned the banking sector. How big of a target is Canada's financial industry to potential cyber threats?
I think like every country in the world, the financial sector is a real target. The good news is, they being the financial sector, they've taken a lot of precautions. They're one of the better prepared sectors of the Canadian economy.
What about some other sectors that you think might be at risk here? Utilities, the oil patch?
I think it's pretty hard to exclude any sector particularly. More than anything else, it's areas that affect the basic infrastructure of the country. You know, if somebody really wants to do harm, they're aiming the infrastructure, the electrical grid, oil and gas. But more easily, it's telecommunications. I mean, more than anything, people want access to telecommunications, not necessarily to kill them, but to be able to have access to the information that's being transmitted. So in Canada, the approach we've tried to take, I think generally, is you go sector by sector. And some sectors are better than others. All have improved over the years. We also have the challenge in Canada that a lot of our infrastructure is connected to that in the United States. And nothing particularly wrong with that. It just means more collaboration, more coordination is required.
The first ever Director of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge, and yourself have both said that you don't think Canadians are fully prepared or aware of cybersecurity risks. Talk to me about how companies may not be properly preparing themselves for this risk.
I would apply that to national security issues generally. I mean, Canadians feel very protected. We have 3 oceans, we have the United States, and compared to a lot of other countries, we haven't been the target as much as many people might think. On the other hand, we have this attitude that unless there's a crisis, everything is going quite well. And I think people in industry, except the real professionals who worry about this day by day, adopt this general approach that Canadians take, which is, you know, we're pretty well protected, we take reasonable precautions. We in this country don't talk about national security issues a lot, and I would include some aspects of cyber in this. You don't talk about it a lot, you don't take precautions. And I want to emphasize, though, that over the years we've got much better. But the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and other countries, I think, are a bit ahead of us.
The CSIS is sometimes asked to weigh in on the takeovers of Canadian companies, specifically when a Canadian company is seen as being somewhat sensitive to our national security. You worked both under the Harper administration and briefly under Trudeau. Did you see any change of attitude towards their posture when it comes to foreign takeovers?
As concerns general posture, no. I mean, I think various governments, various ministers, various officials treat individual cases somewhat differently. But in the time I worked for Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Harper, they both felt that national security was very important, and I think their ministers shared that view. There's no doubt that if you've been in office 10 years like Mr. Harper's government, you would have a slightly different perspective than someone who's only been in office for a year or so. But generally speaking, I think they're very concerned about things like IP theft. You know, it's a serious, serious problem. Our companies spend millions and millions of dollars, develop on research and development. And if somebody can simply come in and go zap, either through a cyber attack or by purchasing a company, not very good.
Sorry, IP. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Well, intellectual property. Basically, it means that a company or the government spends a lot of time, money, and effort making progress in a particular area. It may be in the aircraft industry. It may be on cyber itself. The United Nations, the last time I checked estimates, that about $1 trillion a year is stolen IP around the planet, and several billion dollars in Canada. So you can acquire this IP in a variety of ways. One way is the one you've suggested. You buy a company, you get settled in, you start making contacts, or you use the information already held by that company, and all of a sudden it makes its way back not just to your head office, but to other companies or the government of the country from which you come.
So based on what you're telling me, are there certain companies or sectors that you think should be off limits to foreign buyers?
It's sort of hard to generalize, but I would say, for example, rare earth metals. I mean, it's not something that I think we should make available to other countries. They're very much needed by Canada and other countries in the West. I think we have to be careful about our nuclear technology, our oil and gas technology, aerodynamics, areas like this. And communications. We're very good in communications in this country, and a number of threat agents would have no hesitation at all in trying to get what they can out of our R&D.
What does it mean for Canada's national security and our relationship with the U.S. when there are all these allegations of ties between the White House and Russia?
Well, I think you have to start from the premise that Mr. Trump was elected on the by 60-odd million people. That's legitimate. They're in a democracy, and we're going to have to learn how to deal with them. I don't think the fact that a number of senior people in the United States have dealt with Russia is going to change the fundamentals of our relationship. Russia's there. We have to deal with Russia. I think we have to do so carefully because their interests are very often not our own. So I think, things will sort themselves out eventually. Our government, I think, is being cautious with Russia. Mr. Trump's view is less so. But I think we'd have to admit that what Mr. Trump says and what he does are not always entirely congruent. I'm in the pack that says let's wait and see what he does, as opposed to, getting very, very excited about everything that he and some of his colleagues say.
That was Richard Fadden, former head of CSIS.
Okay, folks, we'll go to the news, and when we come back, Catherine Murray of our affiliate BNN's interview with Arianna Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post. And then after the final break, we go to John York, who is the president of Rain 43, who will comment on Snap's IPO this past week and what the Oscars mean for marketers. You are listening to 580 CFRA.
Now back to Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA.
I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake. A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people.
That was Donald Trump, President Trump, speaking last week at the CPAC conference. The U.S. president hasn't shied away from taking aim at the media, and the media organization that bears our next guest's name hasn't shied away from firing back as well. During the U.S. presidential campaign, the Huffington Post took a look and put the following editor's note at the bottom of every story about then-candidate Trump. It was dropped, however, after he became president. And here for a look at what the media and the president can do to navigate the next 4 years is Huffington Post founder Arianna Huffington. She joins us now from the Young Presidents Organization Conference in Vancouver. Arianna, great to be able to be with you today. And I think that you were able to hear that clip of President Trump talking about the media and the fake news. What's your reaction?
Well, it's pretty unprecedented for a United States president to call the media the enemy of the people, since, after all, it's enshrined in our Constitution that the media and the free press are an essential part of our democracy. So what is happening, though, as a result, the unintended consequence is that the media has really stepped up its coverage of Donald Trump in a way which is very different than the way he was covered during the election. The New York Times had never used the word lying on the front page during the election, but it's using it now.
How does this then develop? Because it seems as though they're continuing to go at it between each other.
Yeah, although I'm sure you noticed that when he gave a very different kind of speech to the joint session of Congress, the press was incredibly complimentary. So it's not as if the press wants to oppose everything he does. It's just opposing statements that are completely untrue or alternative facts, and opposing policies that are destructive.
Arianna, you had a very unconventional relationship with Donald Trump prior to the election win. I'm just wondering your dealings with him and what you've been through, if anything has changed, or what you would recommend.
Oh, I hardly know him. I don't have any relationship with him. And now, as you probably know, I have stepped down as editor of the Huffington Post and founded a new media platform, thriveglobal.com, that addresses the way we work and live. And there is no question that the things my new media platform is addressing, which is an epidemic of burnout and stress that lead to bad decisions, are prevalent also in the White House. We know the president brags about how little sleep he gets. We know that he often tweets in the middle of the night things that make it much harder to govern in a constructive way. So in a sense, he's a case study of the dangers of sleep deprivation, of burnout, of leading from a place of stress in where decisions are definitely not the best.
It is very counter to your current platform, that is for sure, in terms of what you've just described in the sleep patterns, etc. But given that this is the situation and the new reality, we here in Canada, of course, have a relationship with the United States, our largest trading partner. What do you think would be the best way, from everything that you know and you've seen and experienced, for us to communicate and truly develop a strong relationship with the president? What would you suggest?
Well, already, your Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with Donald Trump. Clearly, there are many back channels that are open for communication, and Canada remains so important to the United States. So I think it's really a question of making a distinction between the rhetoric and the reality.
Who do you think, aside from the president, is somebody within his team that Canada should really get to know, somebody who's very influential?
Oh, there are so many people, and the team is still really being formed, and I don't think we'll know for a couple of months exactly where the power centers are. And one of the things that is very clear with Donald Trump is the power center shift. I mean, during the campaign, he changed campaign managers very regularly. So I don't think that the team that is in place now is necessarily the team that's going to be there for the long haul.
What's your view right now of Canada and the Canadian brand?
Well, Canada is absolutely amazing for me. I love it. We launched the Huffington Post here as our first foreign edition, and it's been incredibly successful. I'm personally on the board of a Canadian company, Onyx, so I come to Canada regularly for board meetings, and it's just such an important relationship for both countries. Sometimes we forget that we are two separate countries.
Absolutely. Ariane, I want to get your take as well in terms of the conversations that you're having there today and what your message has been to the group. What are you focused in on? Is it the new platform, your new platform?
Yes, my focus today when I speak at the YPO conference is going to be to let all those leaders who are in the middle of facing multiple disruptions to their industries, their companies, understand the new science that makes the connection between well-being and performance absolutely clear. We see that athletes are ahead of the game here, ahead of business people, in recognizing that when they take care of themselves, they're better on the court and in the field. And it's time that business leaders also recognize that connection. So my message is bringing together the latest science, the latest role models, and encouraging everyone to disrupt the way they run their businesses in order to be able to face more effectively the challenging times ahead.
Ariane, I couldn't agree with you more, having spent the majority of my career on Wall Street and on a trading desk at 5:45 in the morning drinking Diet Pepsi, so I completely hear you and agree. But I'm curious, why was this so important to you, and why was this the initiative that you chose to step into next?
Well, from my own personal experience of collapsing from burnout to my own studies of how much of a pandemic this burnout and stress have become around the world, the cost we're paying, not just in terms of dollars, and trillions of dollars are being wasted because of stress, loss in productivity, higher attrition, etc., but also the cost in terms of decision making. So this is really a real inflection point where we need to disrupt a very defective way of working and living, and we see a lot of companies changing the way they prioritize the well-being of their employees. And I know among our clients of my new company, Accenture, JP Morgan, Airbnb, a lot of these companies are recognizing that when they prioritize the well-being of their employees, it has a real impact on the bottom line. So this is not just a soft benefit.
Your communication with your clients, what's a key takeaway for our viewers to even incorporate in their lives in terms of the advice that you give to these clients? What's one thing we can all be doing a little bit better?
Well, we give them, let me give you just one micro step that any company, any business executive watching can implement. Make sure that you do not just an exit interview, but an entry interview to find out what's really important to every employee and help them achieve it. For someone else who have found out, it may be taking their kid to school at 7:30 in the morning. But if you treat your employees as a full human being and not just somebody who has a function to do, it changes their sense of loyalty and as well, frankly, as their productivity. And a lot of that has to do with setting boundaries to our relationship with technology. If you expect your employees to be always on and answer emails at all hours, they are not going to be as effective when they show up at work the next day.
Very true. Arianna, great to be able to speak with you today. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the conference.
We'll go to the final break, and when we come back, John York, who is president of Rain 43, he'll take a look at Snap's IPO and comment on the importance of the Academy Awards for movie marketing. Stay with us. You are listening to 580 CFRA.
You're listening to Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA.
This week on Money and Marketing, we'll explore what Snapchat means for marketers and whether the Oscars are still important for deciding which movies are box office successes. Joining us is John York. He's president at Rain 43. It's always great to have you here. We're having an interesting conversation, the three of us, just before we came to break about Snapchat. None of us are users, but tell us about the advertising platform here. You've got to understand that, and you do.
So typically with Snapchat, it's no different than any of the social media platforms. It's more of what works when you advertise on it is when you actually engage with the users instead of just put out an ad or an interruption ad. For 50 years, the interruption model in television's always kind of worked. It's you set up and you do a television commercial and leave. It's a little bit harder when it's with an app because somebody's trying to do something, and if you decide to interrupt them while they're trying to do something, it can be quite offensive and difficult. So what brands have done very well, and you can just so you can still do that on Snapchat if you want. There still is interruptive advertising allowed and permitted. And through video. But with Snapchat, what really works is when you actually use their filters or you use some of their actual platform in a way. You see that with Facebook, with gamification. You see that with Twitter, with shared videos, that the things that are interesting to people, that are interesting content. So as Snapchat gets more higher level content, they're doing deals with NFL, they're doing deals with the NBA. As they get into more interesting kind of content plays and try to do more broadcast rich stuff, that's where brands have a chance to bring something unique to somebody and have a chance to be shared and be the hero to somebody. So they can, which is really interesting, which goes back to the early TV of the 50s where you had soap operas or the idea of like soap companies and detergent companies advertising and bringing you a show. So now in Snapchat's in very small bits and pieces, you have people bringing filters or bringing content.
And just quickly explain what a filter is.
So filters, when you're using Snapchat, you have the ability to layer on an image on top of your image, and sometimes it's devil horns. There was, I think, 5 standard Snapchat images typically, but my favorite one is the Taco Bell on Cinco de Mayo had one where you could put your face on top of a taco and then share it with your friends. It stays on your Snapchat for 24 hours, and it engages. And that, like the math for that, again, they went out and they spent, just in the buy, $750,000, which is a reasonable buy, but they had 230 million activations within a 24-hour period, which is like 0.3 cents per interaction, which is an incredible click-through rate and purchase rate. And plus that, it's a positive experience, right? So one, it's not only did you get it seen, not only did people recognize that they dealt with Taco Bell, but it's a very positive situation where they're like, oh, that made me laugh, that was funny. Taco Bell didn't release how much their increase in sales were that week, but they were significant. So, when the platform does that, it works. What it doesn't work is, in a lot of ways, is just as a straight advertiser where you go, we've got X amount of inventory at, Y dollars, and then multiply it and say, this is what our revenue is going to be the year. It really is high risk, high reward advertising for a lot of people.
So
as an investor, John, we're always looking at this and say, when is this thing going to make money? I think last year it lost $500 million. And I think the CEO at some point in the last little while said, we may never be profitable.
Right.
So what are your thoughts there in light of where this advertising model is going to go? Because I'm assuming that's going to be the revenue model for a business like this.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say if I was advising the CEO, never go out and tell people you'll never be profitable.
And
I think it's
Dean, you would know this. That's not standard boilerplate in prospectuses, is it, for companies to say we may never make a profit?
Correct. I don't think you'd attract any investors. But the reality is it's kind of like when you're in a housing bubble type of market, it doesn't really matter if you're renting it or not renting it, the value goes up. Owning an NHL franchise, you may be losing money every year, but the value goes up. That might be the play here, especially in light of the stock being up 45% on the first day.
Yeah, so I think in a world of subscription models, the key for them, like Twitter, is they have two things. One is their technology play, which they're lagging behind, others. Obviously, Facebook has huge market capitalization to move on content and video and the such. And Twitter, subscriptions really is what matters. So if you have 70 million users, which I think they're at currently in America, you have the ability to say, we're interacting with 70 million people. So for as an advertiser, there's always interest there. If you've got the bulk. Now, you're seeing a huge switch in advertising now is there's always this dichotomy between really good content and really local, geo-targeted, specific kind of down and dirty advertising, or what we sort of call cheap and dirty kind of advertising. So the ability to say, hi, Paul, like the old school direct marketing, right? And that usually is bad quality advertising. Now what you're seeing is a combination of taking really good quality broadcast content and then making it local and making it specific to the user. So if they can do that to 70 million people and make 70 million people feel like they're getting directly advertised to from high brands and high value, their platform's worth a lot of money, because that's something television hasn't been able to do because it's not a two-way medium. It's something that Facebook hasn't been able to do because it's a little bit more scattered. So you have a specific thing where you're able to say, I can talk to these 700 people and provide them with a high quality experience. So, it's, I think that their long view is just going to be about get as many subscribers there. On revenue, they're starting to make claims that they may have up to $1 billion in revenue next year, that they're making these major sales, because as advertisers, you want to try in a unique way, especially with that millennial market, to try and reach them in a way that they advertise the best. So I think it's got a huge opportunity. Same thing with Twitter with video, but again, capturing the cost. What people don't forget is these platforms cost a lot of money to operate. Yeah. So,
very quickly, Facebook wanted to buy Snapchat. It was rebuffed. Where do you think Snapchat will fit in this new advertising world?
Well, I think Snapchat has a chance to. I think Snapchat will constantly probably be put into the same pantheon as Twitter. They'll be
that's not good.
Yeah, I think that's where they'll probably be the better Twitter. I don't know if they'll ever capture or diversify their platform enough to really expand their marketplace. So, it has a chance to succeed for a short period of time if they don't evolve or become a broadcaster or somebody like Netflix. A relationship with a content company would probably be a very good play for them. But again, the market capitalization gets so big on these guys, doing a deal becomes extremely difficult or cumbersome, because it's kind of exponential when you add the two highly rated costs. It's a little expensive to put Netflix together with Snapchat, but that's what would work very well.
Thanks a great deal, John York, president of Rain 43. As always, have a good weekend, John.
Well, that's it for Money Talk. Just before we go, I'd like to mention that, in my opinion, we're going to see the Federal Reserve Board in the U.S. raise interest rates at their next meeting, and we'll probably see further increases during the course of the year. And part of that is because of the data that indicates that the U.S. economy is doing better on a sustained basis, but also inflation is a real problem, and it's breaking out all over again in the United States and also in Canada. Witness Toronto real estate prices. So be prepared for an interest rate hike. As for markets, who knows? We seem to be in a bull run, stimulated by Donald Trump's promises, but one should probably be very careful and at least take some money off the table, given that stock prices are well up since the U.S. election. On that note, thanks so much for joining us. Wish you a good week. I'm John Budden, and you are listening to 580 CFRA.